Hey, welcome to the Eddie Hyatt Podcast. I am Eddie Hyatt, and I want to show you today from the writings of the founders themselves that Jimmy Kimmel's recent inflammatory remarks about the assassination of Charlie Kirk are not protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution. Now, I know some of you are probably, most of you are familiar, if not all of you, with this controversy that arose around this. He was suspended, has since been reinstated. But here is what he said right after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. He made this statement. He said, the mega gang, in other words, the supporters of Donald Trump, the mega gang was desperately trying to characterize this kid, the one who murdered Charlie Kirk, was trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and trying to score political points from it. You hear what he's saying? Totally false. He's trying to say that this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk was one of their own. It was a Trump supporter, and that they were trying to characterize him as something else and score political points off of it. Totally false. Totally false and malicious. He also went on to describe Donald Trump's expressed grief at the murder of Charlie Kirk as how a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish. What egregious, what inflammatory, malicious speech. And such speech is not covered by the First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and the freedom to peacefully assemble. Now, what I want to show you today from the writings of the founders is that when they implemented these guarantees of freedom, including freedom of speech, they assumed a moral framework. They assumed moral parameters around these guarantees of freedom of speech. But what has happened in the modern world is that uh, these guarantees of the freedom of speech, the Constitution has been morally dumbed down in the same way that American education has been dumbed down, and this has been documented. In other words, tests have been made easier. Uh, Academic requirements have been reduced and made much easier to perform. In other words, the whole education system has been dumbed down. And in a similar way, the Constitution has been morally dumbed down in order to accommodate a morally degenerate generation. So I want to show you what the founders had in mind when they implemented this First Amendment right to freedom of speech. They did not have in mind to guarantee any and every kind of speech. In fact, they banned certain kinds of speech. For example, when George Washington was appointed commander in chief of the colonial army, one of the first things he did was to ban certain kinds of speech. Yes, he did. He banned certain kinds of speech. He issued an order. One of the first things he did, he issued an order. And let me just read it here from this paper. And this is I'm reading from an article I wrote that's available on my blog. Um, so shortly after he was appointed by the Continental Congress to be the commander in chief, he issued an order forbidding profanity and swearing, prohibited, banned profanity and swearing in the American army. And he ordered each day to begin with prayer. So there was a certain kind of speech that he ordered, and there was a certain kind of speech that he banned. And he explained, he gave a reason for this. He said, we cannot expect the blessing of heaven on our fight for liberty if we are insulting heaven with our speech. Wow. And so George Washington, he implemented a ban on certain kinds of speech, but he ordered another kind of speech, prayer, that was to be made. He also forbade gambling and drunkenness and expressed his desire that every officer and man will endeavor to as live and act as becomes a Christian soldier. The founders, like George Washington, without exception, believed morality and religion to be the basis of freedom. Now, the founders, they use the word religion a lot. And when they use the word religion, they're talking about Christianity. That was the only religion that they knew. And particularly the Protestant form of Christianity. Yes, there was one founder who was Catholic. Um, his name was Carroll, and but the most of the founders and most of America, they were Protestants, particularly Protestants out of what's been called the Radical Reformation, the Separatist Puritans, the Baptists, the Quakers, the Presbyterians. These were the people, and their emphasis was on freedom. And what you have to realize is, in the 18th century, neither Catholicism, Anglicanism, or Lutheranism had the principles, the spiritual principles and philosophy that could bring forth an American based on faith and freedom. Why? Because they were all functioning on a church model begun by Constantine that was predicated on power rather than freedom. In other words, they all had state run, state supported churches that used the power of the state to enforce their practices and their doctrines. And many of the founders' parents and grandparents had fled such religious tyranny and had come to America to be free to practice their faith and to speak their faith. In the old world, they had been imprisoned for criticizing the monarch, the king, the pope, or a bishop. Some even put to death, many put to death, not by pagans, but by uh, the the people, the supporters, the sustainers of these state-run churches that had begun with Constantine. And so the people that came to America, they wanted the freedom to be able to speak to power, to speak the truth, to quote the scriptures and to speak the truth. And so uh, they all believed that Christianity and morality to be the basis of a true free society and a free republic. This is why John Dickerson, founding father and chairman of the committee that produced the Articles of Confederation, the nation after the Declaration of Independence, they functioned by what was called the Articles of Confederation. Then out of that, they formulated the U.S. Constitution. Anyway, John Dickinson said, when states lose their liberty, this calamity is generally owing to a decay of virtue. Do you hear that? When states lose their liberty, it's generally owing to a loss of virtue. What is virtue? Virtue is moral excellence. Moral excellence. And the founders all agreed that only a virtuous people could enjoy the liberties that they were enshrining in the founding documents. For example, 2 weeks before he signed the Declaration of Independence, John Adams wrote a letter to his cousin Zebediah Adams, who was a minister of the gospel. And in the letter, he said to this, listen to this, this is powerful. He said, statesmen, my dear sir, may plan and speculate for liberty, but it is religion. What does he mean by religion? He's talking about Christianity. But it is religion and morality alone which can establish the principles upon which freedom can securely stand. The only foundation of a free constitution is pure virtue. The only foundation of a constitution that guarantees freedom is moral excellence, is what John Adams was saying. Did you hear that? I want to say that again. He said that the only foundation of a constitution that guarantees things like freedom of religion and freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, the only foundation for that is virtue or moral excellence. So John Adams also clearly spelled this out in a 1798 presidential speech. He was now president of the United States, the second president, to the officers of the Massachusetts militia. Adams made clear his belief in a national Christian morality as the only hope for the survival of the American Republic and the freedoms which it had implemented. He declared, listen to this, he said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious or Christian people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other. You know what has happened? There are lots of good, decent people across America, but there's also has come a corruption of our culture, a degeneration of our culture, a moral dumbing down of our culture. And so much of our culture and society today is incompatible with the Constitution that was formulated based on Christian moral values. Wow, incredible. Now, in his farewell address, I believe it was in 1798, George Washington, after serving 2 terms as the nation's first president, excuse me, he made the very same points as Adam, and he exhorted the new nation to cling to morality and religion. Did you hear that? He exhorted the nation to cling, to hold on to morality and Christianity. And he called these pillars of society and said that they were indispensable supports for human happiness and national prosperity. Did you hear that? Washington didn't say these things should be tolerated. He didn't say morality and Christianity should be tolerated like the Democrat Party does today. That's their approach. No, he said they are indispensable for our republic and its guarantees of human freedom. Thomas Jefferson was so impressed with Washington's speech that he made it required reading at the University of Virginia, which he had founded. So he was in agreement with all of this. And what is the source of this morality? Well, they all believed it was Christianity, that it was the Bible. Thomas Jefferson made this clear when he said, of all the systems of morality that have come under my observations, none appear to me so pure as that of Jesus. Benjamin Rush, a Philadelphia physician and signer of the Declaration of Independence, one of the founding fathers, he made the same point as Washington, Adams, and Jefferson. Direct quote from another founding father. The only foundation for a republic is not a pure democracy. It functions on a constitution. It functions with elected representatives. It has checks and balances, recognizing that human nature is flawed, and seeks to institute checks and balances that will protect the republic in this regard. But listen to what he said. He said the only foundation for a republic is to be laid in religion. Without this, there can be no liberty. Without Christianity, he said, there can be no liberty. Why? Because an immoral and non-religious people will turn freedom into anarchy, leading to societal chaos. And we're seeing this happen in many respects in America today, where people are trying to defend the guarantees of freedom in our Constitution. They're trying to use it to defend societal chaos and anarchy and anarchical speech. Oh, my friends, this is why we need another great awakening in America. And I believe we're seeing signs of it breaking forth, very encouraging signs. So this is the truth. The founders believed that a vibrant Christianity was necessary for the ongoing success of the republic they had formed and for the maintenance of the freedoms that they had implemented. And this is why the late Catholic scholar, Dr. Michael Novak, said, far from having a hostility toward religion, the founders counted on religion, that is Christianity. They counted on Christianity for the underlying philosophy of the republic, its supporting ethic, and its reliable and a reliable source of rejuvenation. So the founders implemented the first guarantee of free speech for a virtuous society that was seeking after truth. They implemented that Second Amendment freedom of speech for a people of moral excellence. They did not formulate it for people like Jimmy Kimmel. And I'll read to you what he said, the malicious things he said. This is why he got suspended. Yeah, he got reinstated, but there is a large portion of stations that did not reinstate his program. And I commend them for that. Trying to be funny. He's supposed to be a comedian. I have actually never watched his show. He said that the MAGA gang, in other words, a supporter of Trump, he was commenting on the assassination of Charlie Kirk that had just happened. Listen how malicious this is. He said that it was the MAGA gang that was desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and trying to score political points from it. Can you imagine? Claiming that it was actually a Trump supporter, part of the MAGA gang, as he called it, who had murdered Charlie Kirk, and now trying to score political points out of it. And then he referred to Trump's expression of grief over the murder of Charlie Kirk as how a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish. What? And see, what he said was absolutely false. It was a lie. It wasn't true. It was malicious. No, the founders, they would roll over in the grave at people trying to use the Second Amendment to say that such speech is supported by the Constitution. No, it is not. America's founding fathers made it clear that the republic that they had founded and the freedoms that they had implemented were for a Christian and a people of moral excellence who would use their freedoms for doing good. Hallelujah. So, my friends, this is why we must have another great awakening across America. Otherwise, as the founders all believed, a people who lose their morality, who lose their faith, those kind of people will wind up losing their freedoms. And so if we're going to have freedoms, if the next generation is going to enjoy the freedoms that my parents and grandparents and that I enjoyed growing up, we've got to have another great awakening across the land. And thank God we see it happening. Charlie Kirk's memorial service was incredible. And I think that something is shifting. I believe that God is moving in a special way. And hey, I've written all kinds of books. I don't have the ones that I wanted to show you, but I have my latest book right here called The Book That Made America Great. But I encourage you to read my book, 1726, The Year That Defined America. 1726, The Year That Defined America. It's on Amazon, and it will document everything I'm telling you and so much more. I'm Eddie Hyatt, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. God bless you.